Marcus Richardson stood before the gleaming mirrors of the Golden Palace, adjusting his pristine white waiter's uniform with practiced precision. The restaurant's crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow across the marble floors, creating an atmosphere of understated luxury that had made his establishment the talk of New York's elite dining scene. Few knew that the man often seen carrying plates and attending to guests was actually the owner of this acclaimed restaurant. At 45, Marcus had built his empire from scratch, turning a modest inheritance from his grandmother into a culinary landmark. The Golden Palace wasn't just a restaurant, it was a statement, a testament to excellence that transcended prejudice and preconceptions. Every evening he donned his waiter's uniform, a tradition that began as a necessity and evolved into his most powerful management tool. Tonight, the restaurant buzzed with its usual elegant energy. The maitre d', James, approached Marcus with a slight furrow in his brow. "Sir, the Hassan party has arrived. Mr. Hassan's reputation precedes him. Apparently he's quite particular about his dining experience." Marcus nodded, having heard of Kamal Hassan, the oil magnate whose name frequently graced both business pages and society columns. "Thank you, James. I'll handle their table personally." As he made his way through the dining room, Marcus observed his staff executing their duties with the precision he'd instilled through years of training. The sommelier was discussing vintage selections with an elderly couple, while the pastry chef emerged briefly to receive compliments from a celebrating family. The Hassan party occupied the most prominent table in the house. Kamal Hassan sat like a king holding court, surrounded by assistants and a striking woman Marcus would later learn was Sarah Mitchell, his chief consultant. Hassan's presence commanded attention, his expensive suit and imperious bearing marking him as someone accustomed to power. Marcus approached the table with professional grace. "Good evening, Mr. Hassan. Welcome to the Golden Palace." Hassan fairly glanced up from his menu. "Your wine list is disappointingly provincial. Surely you have something more exclusive hidden away." Sarah Mitchell, seated to Hassan's right, shot an apologetic glance at Marcus. There was something in her eyes, a mix of embarrassment and resignation that suggested she'd witnessed this behavior before. "Our cellar holds several rare vintages not listed on the menu," Marcus replied smoothly. "I'd be happy to have our sommelier discuss them with you." "No need," Hassan waved dismissively. "Bring the 1982 Lafite Rothschild. I assume you have at least that." Marcus nodded, maintaining his composed demeanor. "An excellent choice, sir. Would you like to begin with any appetizers while the wine is being prepared?" The evening progressed with Hassan growing increasingly demanding. Each course was met with subtle criticisms and condescending remarks. Marcus noticed Sarah becoming more uncomfortable with each passing moment, her professional facade cracking slightly whenever Hassan's behavior crossed another line of propriety. What caught Marcus's attention, however, was the dynamic between Hassan and his staff. The bodyguards remained stoic, but the assistants exchanged knowing looks and Sarah seemed to be fighting an internal battle. There was a story here, something beyond the typical tension between a demanding client and service staff. As Marcus orchestrated the service with careful attention, he began to see patterns in Hassan's behavior. The man's arrogance seemed almost practiced, as if he were playing a role he thought was expected of him. Whenever Sarah spoke, Hassan's demeanor shifted slightly, revealing a flicker of something else, perhaps respect or even dependency. The evening was young, but Marcus could feel the energy in the restaurant shifting. Other patrons were beginning to notice Hassan's behavior, and the staff was watching carefully to see how their disguised owner would handle this challenging situation. Little did anyone know, this evening would mark the beginning of a story that would change not just the Golden Palace, but the lives of everyone involved in unexpected ways. Sarah Mitchell had spent 3 years as Kamal Hassan's chief consultant, long enough to understand the complexities behind his harsh exterior. As she watched him berate another server over the temperature of his water, she thought back to the young scholarship student she'd met during her research into his past, the one who had arrived in America with dreams as big as his determination. The Golden Palace's ambience was exactly the kind of setting that typically triggered Hassan's worst behavior. Sarah had seen it before, The more elegant the establishment, the more he felt compelled to assert his dominance. But tonight felt different. The waiter serving their table carried himself with an unusual grace, handling Hassan's demands with a quiet dignity that seemed to both irritate and intrigue her employer. "The service here is atrocious," Hassan declared loudly, causing nearby diners to glance their way. "Perhaps I should buy this place and show them how a real restaurant should be run." Sarah noticed the waiter's shoulders stiffen slightly, the first crack in his professional facade she'd seen all evening. There was something about him, a presence that seemed incongruous with his role. She'd worked with enough powerful people to recognize authority, even when it was carefully disguised. "Sir," the waiter responded with measured calm, "I assure you our staff is committed to providing the finest dining experience possible. Is there something specific we can do to improve your evening?" Hassan's eyes narrowed at the response, unused to such composed pushback from service staff. "Yes, you can start by explaining why a restaurant of this supposed caliber employs people who clearly don't understand true luxury." The comment hung in the air like smoke, acrid and unwelcome. Sarah watched as other staff members tensed, while their seemingly unflappable waiter maintained his professional demeanor. She found herself wondering about him, about the story behind those controlled responses and dignity in the face of abuse. Between courses, Sarah excused herself to the ladies' room, needing a moment away from the tension. In the elegant powder room, she encountered an elderly woman touching up her makeup. "First time here?" the woman asked kindly. "Yes," Sarah replied, grateful for normal conversation. "It's quite beautiful. Marcus has done wonders with this place," the woman said proudly. "From nothing to this in just 10 years, and still so humble. Insists on working the floor himself most nights." Sarah's professional instincts tingled. "Marcus?" "The owner, dear. Though you'd never know it, the way he serves alongside his staff. Says it keeps him connected to what matters." The revelation hit Sarah like a thunderbolt. Suddenly, the waiter's unusual poise made perfect sense. She thought about Hassan's behavior throughout the evening, about the owner's restraint in the face of it, and felt a plan beginning to form. Returning to the table, she observed the dynamic with new eyes. Hassan was critiquing the wine service now, but Sarah barely heard the words. She was watching the owner of the Golden Palace execute his duties with perfect precision, turning Hassan's attempts at humiliation into demonstrations of exceptional service. The evening continued to unfold with increasing tension. Other patrons were now openly watching their table, their expressions a mix of disgust at Hassan's behavior and admiration for the staff's professionalism. Sarah noticed small details she'd missed before: the way other employees looked to their disguised owner for subtle cues, the quiet authority in his gentle corrections to junior staff. What fascinated her most was how this revelation transformed her understanding of the evening's power dynamic. Hassan believed he was demonstrating his superiority while unknowingly performing his privilege for the very person he sought to diminish. The irony was magnificent, but Sarah knew it couldn't last. Something would have to give. The elegant dining room of the Golden Palace held countless stories within its walls, but none quite like the one unfolding that evening. Among the witnesses to Hassan's displaying behavior was Claire Thompson, a regular patron who had been coming to the restaurant since its opening days. She sat at her usual corner table, her years of friendship with Marcus allowing her to see beyond his waiter's disguise to the subtle signs of his growing resolve. As she observed the scene, Claire's mind wandered to the early days of the Golden Palace, when Marcus had shared his vision with her over coffee in a half-renovated dining room. "This place won't just serve food," he had told her. "It will serve dignity." Now, watching him navigate Hassan's provocations with grace, she saw that vision being tested in real time. At Hassan's table, the tension continued to mount. Sarah Mitchell found herself increasingly drawn into conversation with Marcus, their exchanges revealing an unexpected depth of understanding about the restaurant industry. Hassan noticed these interactions with growing irritation, his demands becoming more excessive with each course. "Tell me," Hassan demanded during the main course, "where did you learn about fine dining? Surely not in any establishment of actual quality." Marcus's response was measured, each word carefully chosen. "My education in hospitality spans many years and continents, sir. I believe true quality is found in the details and the respect we show to both food and guests." The answer seemed to unsettle Hassan, though he couldn't quite explain why. Sarah watched the exchange with keen interest, noting how Marcus's responses consistently elevated the conversation, refusing to be drawn into mere servitude. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, the Golden Palace's staff operated with practiced efficiency, though whispers about the situation in the dining room circulated among them. Head chef Maria Rodriguez, who had worked alongside Marcus for 8 years, kept a watchful eye on the pass, while monitoring the growing tension through the service window. "He's handling it just like he handles everything," Maria remarked to James, the maître d', as they observed Marcus deftly manage another of Hassan's demands, with grace and strategy. What none of them could see was the internal struggle Hassan was experiencing. Each interaction with Marcus stirred uncomfortable memories of his own past, memories of being the outsider, the scholarship student trying to prove himself worthy of acceptance in elite circles. These memories manifested as increasingly aggressive behavior, a shield against his own vulnerability. Sarah recognized the signs. She had spent months researching Hassan's background before accepting her position, and she knew about his difficult years as a foreign student in American universities. The parallels between his past struggles and his current behavior were striking, though Hassan seemed blind to the connection. As the evening progressed, other diners began sharing quiet observations. A young couple celebrating their anniversary couldn't help but notice the contrast between Hassan's behavior and the staff's professionalism. The husband, Michael Chen, found himself particularly moved by Marcus's handling of the situation, reminded of his own father's struggles as an immigrant restaurant owner. "It's like watching a masterclass in dignity," Michael whispered to his wife Emma. "Every time that man tries to diminish him, he rises above it." The restaurant's ambient noise provided a gentle backdrop to the unfolding drama, the clink of fine china and soft music, creating an almost theatrical atmosphere. Through it all, Marcus maintained his composure, though those who knew him well could see the subtle signs of his growing determination to address the situation. Claire Thompson, still observing from her corner table, recognized the look in Marcus's eyes, the same look he'd had when he first announced his plan to open the Golden Palace in a neighborhood that others had written off. She knew that look meant change was coming, though how it would manifest remained to be seen. The evening had reached a crucial point, with dessert service approaching. The kitchen staff prepared their finest offerings, each plate a work of art that reflected the Golden Palace's commitment to excellence. As Marcus supervised the preparation, Sarah Mitchell made a decision that would alter the course of the evening. Excusing herself from the table once more, she made her way to where James stood surveying the dining room. Their brief exchange, though quiet, carried the weight of imminent revelation. Sarah's words, carefully chosen, would soon set in motion events that would force Hassan to confront not just the truth about the Golden Palace's owner, but about himself as well. The Golden Palace's dessert service was traditionally a celebration of artistry, but tonight it served as the backdrop for a mounting revelation. Sarah Mitchell's conversation with James had set things in motion, and now she watched as Hassan continued his performance of superiority, oblivious to the shifting dynamics around him. The evening's tension had reached the other tables, creating an atmosphere thick with anticipation. Among the observers was Professor David Chen, a sociology lecturer who had been quietly taking mental notes on the evening's display of power dynamics. He had chosen the Golden Palace for dinner after hearing his students praise its inclusive atmosphere, never expecting to witness such a profound demonstration of grace under pressure. Hassan's voice cut through the elegant ambience once again. "I suppose this is what passes for luxury in establishments like this," he remarked, examining the intricately crafted dessert menu, "though I doubt your pastry chef has ever experienced true refinement." Sarah noticed Marcus's subtle shift in posture, not one of submission, but of someone preparing to reshape the narrative. She thought back to the folder of research she had compiled on Hassan years ago, particularly the newspaper clipping from his university days. The image of a young Kamal Hassan accepting a scholarship, his eyes bright with hope and determination, stood in stark contrast to the man before her now. In the kitchen, pastry chef Sophie Laurent, a graduate of Paris's finest culinary schools, prepared her signature dessert with practiced precision. She had worked in Michelin-starred restaurants across Europe before choosing the Golden Palace, drawn by Marcus's vision of creating something more meaningful than just another elite dining establishment. "The chocolate soufflé for Mr. Hassan's table," Sophie announced, her French accent adding authority to her words. "It must be perfect." Marcus inspected the dessert with careful attention. "It always is, Sophie," he replied, his voice carrying a weight that suggested he was speaking about more than just the soufflé. Back in the dining room, Sarah decided it was time to begin shifting the evening's trajectory. "Mr. Hassan," she began, her voice carefully modulated, "this reminds me of that cafe in Cambridge you mentioned, the one where you used to study during your scholarship years." Hassan's reaction was subtle but immediate. His shoulders tensed, and for a moment his carefully constructed facade wavered. "That was a long time ago," he replied curtly, but Sarah could see she had struck a chord. Other diners pretended not to listen, but the mention of Hassan's past as a scholarship student rippled through the room. Claire Thompson, still observing from her corner table, leaned forward slightly, recognizing the skillful way Sarah was weaving past and present together. Marcus approached with the dessert presentation, each movement deliberate and refined. As he served the soufflé, he added an unexpected touch, a small decorative element that precisely matched the description of a dessert Hassan had once described from his university days. Hassan stared at the dessert, momentarily speechless. The elegant chocolate design triggered a flood of memories. Late nights studying in that small cafe, the owner who would save day-old pastries for struggling students, the kindness that had helped him survive those early years in a foreign country. Sarah watched the recognition flash across Hassan's face, followed by something deeper, perhaps the first crack in the armor he had built around himself. She caught Marcus's eye, and in that brief exchange she saw understanding. They were both working toward the same goal, though from different angles. The other guests in the restaurant had become part of this unfolding drama, their own desserts temporarily forgotten as they witnessed the subtle shift in atmosphere. Professor Chen found himself reaching for his notebook, unable to resist documenting what he recognized as a masterclass in social dynamics and personal transformation. As Hassan struggled to maintain his composure, Marcus continued his service with unwavering professionalism. Each interaction now carried additional weight, laden with unspoken understanding and the potential for change. The evening was approaching, its climax, but the final act would require perfect timing and the courage to confront long-buried truths. The Golden Palace's ornate mirrors reflected more than just the elegant decor that evening. They captured the subtle transformations occurring within its walls. Hassan sat before his partially eaten soufflé, his usual confidence wavering as memories of his past continued to surface. The familiar taste had transported him back to those humble beginnings he'd worked so hard to forget. Sarah watched as her employer struggled with these unbidden recollections. She had never seen him quite so unsettled, not even during the most challenging business negotiations. The carefully constructed walls of privilege and power were beginning to show their first real cracks. "The dessert," Hassan said, his voice unusually quiet. "It reminds me of—" He trailed off, unwilling or unable to complete the thought. Marcus, still maintaining his role as waiter, stepped forward with perfect timing. "Perhaps Sir is reminded of the cafe near Cambridge. I've heard their chocolate soufflé was quite memorable, especially for students far from home." The precision of this reference caused Hassan to look up sharply. How could you possibly know about that? Around them, the restaurant's other patrons continued their meals, but their attention was clearly focused on the drama unfolding at the central table. Professor Chen had abandoned any pretense of not watching, his academic interest fully engaged in what he recognized as a moment of profound social significance. Claire Thompson from her corner table signaled discreetly to James, the maitre d'. Years of friendship with Marcus had taught her to recognize the signs of an approaching revelation. James nodded in understanding, quietly instructing the staff to prepare for whatever might come next. Sarah chose this moment to add another layer to the unfolding scenario. "Mr. Hassan, do you remember telling me about Mrs. Peterson, the librarian who used to save you a study room during finals week?" Hassan's expression shifted again, the memory clearly striking another chord. She always made sure I had a quiet place to study, said every student deserved a fair chance, regardless of where they came from. The restaurant seemed to hold its collective breath. Even the kitchen staff had paused their work, sensing through the service window that something extraordinary was taking place in the dining room. Marcus moved with deliberate grace as he cleared some dishes, his next words carefully chosen. "It's amazing how a small kindness can change someone's life, isn't it, sir? How being treated with dignity can shape a person's future." Hassan's hands tightened around his napkin. The evening's carefully maintained veneer of superiority was crumbling, replaced by something more vulnerable and authentic. His gaze darted around the room, taking in the other diners, the staff, the elegant surroundings, all of it suddenly seeming to hold a different meaning. Sophia Laurent emerged briefly from the kitchen, ostensibly to check on the dessert's reception, but really to witness this moment that the entire staff had been anticipating. She exchanged a knowing look with Marcus, remembering their conversation from years ago about the power of food to bridge divides and heal wounds. The young couple, Michael and Emma Chen, watched the scene unfold with increasing empathy. Michael found himself remembering stories his father had told him about his own struggles as an immigrant entrepreneur, about the importance of never forgetting where you came from, no matter how far you'd risen. Sarah leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle but firm. "You once told me that your greatest achievement wasn't your business success, but proving that someone from your background could succeed in spite of the obstacles. Do you remember saying that, Mr. Hassan?" The question hung in the air like crystal chimes, clear and resonant. Hassan's expression underwent another subtle transformation as he looked at his reflection in one of the restaurant's mirrors. For perhaps the first time that evening, he truly saw himself, not the powerful businessman he'd become, but the complete journey that had brought him to this moment. The Golden Palace's elegant lighting seemed to soften as Hassan sat in uncharacteristic silence, the weight of his memories pressing against the carefully constructed walls of his present identity. Sarah watched as her usually commanding employer struggled with emotions she had never seen him display in their 3 years of working together. "There was another restaurant," Hassan suddenly said, his voice carrying an unfamiliar vulnerability. "In my first year at university. The owner," he paused, collecting himself, "he would let foreign students eat there even when we were short on money, said good food was a right, not a privilege." Marcus, who had been quietly attending to nearby tables, returned to Hassan's table with impeccable timing. "Some people understand that a restaurant can be more than just a business, sir. It can be a sanctuary, a place where dignity is served alongside the meals." The words struck Hassan with unexpected force. He looked at Marcus, really looked at him, for perhaps the first time that evening. Something about the waiter's bearing, his quiet confidence, began to stir questions in Hassan's mind. Around them, the restaurant's atmosphere had transformed into something almost theatrical. Other diners had become invested in the unfolding drama, their own conversations falling to whispers. Professor Chen had abandoned all pretense of eating, his academic mind cataloging every nuance of this remarkable social phenomenon. Claire Thompson, from her corner table, caught Marcus's eye and gave him a slight nod. She had witnessed countless moments of transformation in this restaurant over the years, but none quite like this. The setting seemed to vibrate with potential, energy, like a symphony building toward its crescendo. Sarah chose this moment to push further. "Mr. Hassan, do you remember telling me about your first job interview after graduation? About the receptionist who assumed you were in the wrong building?" Hassan's face tightened at the memory. "She said someone like me couldn't possibly be there for the executive training program." His voice carried decades of accumulated pain and triumph. "I proved her wrong. I proved them all wrong." "And now?" Marcus asked quietly, his question laden with meaning. "What would that young student think of the man you've become?" The question landed like a bolt of lightning. Hassan's hand trembled, slightly as he reached for his water glass, the crystal catching the light and creating prisms on the white tablecloth. The restaurant's mirrors seemed to multiply the moment, reflecting it back from every angle. In the kitchen, Chef Maria Rodriguez paused in her work, sensing through years of experience that something extraordinary was happening in her dining room. She watched through the service window as Marcus stood before Hassan's table, his posture, revealing nothing of his true identity, but everything about his purpose. The young couple, Michael and Emma Chen, held hands under their table, both moved by the scene unfolding before them. Michael thought of his own father's journey, of the lessons about humility and remembrance that had shaped his childhood. Sarah's voice cut through the tension with gentle precision. "You once told me that success wasn't just about making money. It was about changing the narrative, about showing that someone from your background could belong in any room." Hassan's carefully maintained facade cracked further. He looked around the elegant dining room, seeing it with new eyes. The staff he had dismissed, the service he had belittled, the very atmosphere he had tried to diminish, all of it suddenly appeared transformed. Marcus moved with deliberate grace as he adjusted a place setting, his every movement a testament to the dignity of service. "Sometimes, sir," he said softly, "we forget that the true measure of success isn't in how far we've climbed, but in how we treat others on our journey." The Golden Palace held its breath as Marcus straightened to his full height, something shifting in his demeanor that caught everyone's attention. The subtle transformation was impossible to miss, the waiter's practiced humility giving way to an unmistakable air of quiet authority. Even Hassan, lost in his own thoughts, sensed the change in the atmosphere. "Mr. Hassan," Marcus began, his voice taking on a new timbre, "would you join me for a moment? There's something in our wine, cellar, I believe you'd find interesting." Sarah caught the significance of the moment immediately. She had witnessed countless business negotiations, but never had she seen such masterful orchestration of a revelation. The other diners watched with rapt attention as Hassan, somewhat puzzled by the unusual request, rose from his chair. "The wine cellar?" Hassan questioned, his earlier arrogance replaced by genuine curiosity. "Yes," Marcus replied, gesturing toward a discreet door near the kitchen. "Sometimes the most valuable discoveries are found in unexpected places." As they walked through the restaurant, Claire Thompson smiled knowingly. She had been present years ago when Marcus first discovered the wine cellar, an architectural gem that had helped convince him to purchase the building. It had become his favorite place for important conversations. The cellar itself was a marvel of design, with vaulted ceilings and carefully controlled temperature. Bottles lined the walls in elegant racks, their labels representing some of the finest vintages in the world. Hassan's expertise in wine was genuine, and despite himself, he found his interest piqued by the collection. "This is impressive," Hassan admitted, his eyes scanning the rare vintages. "I wouldn't have expected." "What we expect and what exists are often quite different," Marcus interrupted gently. He moved to a particular section of the cellar, where a small table had been set up with 2 glasses. "This area holds special meaning for me. Would you care to sit?" Hassan found himself complying, his usual commanding presence subdued by the unusual circumstances. Above them, the restaurant continued its evening service, but both men knew that this moment held significance beyond the ordinary flow of dining and hospitality. "Tell me, Mr. Hassan," Marcus began, "when you were that scholarship student at Cambridge, did you ever imagine you'd become who you are today?" The question, coming from this supposedly simple waiter, struck Hassan with unexpected force. "How do you know so much about my past?" "Because I make it my business to understand people," Marcus replied, selecting a bottle from the rack with practiced ease. "Just as you once had to understand your professors, your classmates, the system you were trying to navigate." Hassan watched as Marcus expertly opened the wine, the ritual familiar yet somehow different in this setting. "You're not just a waiter, are you?" Marcus smiled, pouring 2 glasses of the rich red wine. "No, Mr. Hassan, I'm not. Just as you're not just the demanding customer you've been pretending to be tonight." The cellar's perfect acoustics carried their voices clearly, creating an intimate atmosphere that made pretense increasingly difficult to maintain. Hassan found himself studying Marcus with new eyes, seeing beyond the waiter's uniform to something he should have recognized earlier, the bearing of a fellow self-made man. "This restaurant," Marcus continued, "every detail, every service, every interaction, it's all intentional. Just like your success was intentional. Nothing was handed to either of us, was it?" The truth began to dawn on Hassan's face. "You're the owner," he said, not as a question but as a realization. "All evening, you've been serving you," Marcus finished. "Yes, just as others once served you, back when you were finding your way. The question is, Mr. Hassan, what did you learn from those experiences? And more importantly, what have you taught others through your own success?" The wine cellar's intimate atmosphere amplified the weight of Marcus's revelation. Hassan sat in stunned silence, the glass of wine untouched before him, as the full impact of the evening's events washed over him. Each interaction, each measured response to his provocations, took on new meaning in light of this discovery. "All evening," Hassan said slowly, "you've been serving me, knowing that I was—" His voice trailed off, unable to complete the thought. Marcus took a measured sip of his wine before responding. "I serve in my restaurant every night, Mr. Hassan, not because I have to, but because it reminds me of something essential, something I think you once knew as well." Upstairs, Sarah had made her way to where Claire Thompson sat, the two women sharing knowing looks as they waited for Hassan and Marcus to return. The restaurant buzzed with anticipation, the other diners sensing that something significant was transpiring in the wine cellar below. "When I first came to America," Hassan began unexpectedly, his voice carrying an unfamiliar vulnerability, "there was a professor who told me that true character is revealed not in how we treat our equals, but in how we treat those we perceive as beneath us." Marcus nodded, letting the words hang in the air. The cellar's perfect acoustics seemed to give them additional weight, bouncing them back like an echo of conscience. "I built the Golden Palace," Marcus said, gesturing to the space around them, "not just as a restaurant, but as a testament to dignity. Every person who walks through those doors, whether they're serving or being served, carries their own story of struggle and triumph." Hassan's eyes moved across the carefully curated wine collection, seeing it now as more than just a display of wealth. Each bottle represented a choice, a commitment to excellence that went beyond mere luxury. "Your staff," Hassan said, realization dawning in his voice. "They all know who you are, don't they? Even as you serve alongside them. They know what matters most, that we're all in this together. Success isn't just about rising above others, Mr. Hassan, it's about lifting others as we rise." In the kitchen above, Chef Maria had gathered the staff around her, sharing stories of their early days with Marcus. Each tale revealed another facet of their owner's character, his insistence on excellence, his unwavering respect for every employee, his belief in the transformative power of dignity. Professor Chen, still at his table upstairs, had begun making notes on his napkin, recognizing that he was witnessing something that went beyond mere restaurant drama. This was a masterclass in human psychology, in the power of perspective and the possibility of change. "I've spent years," Hassan admitted, his voice barely above a whisper, "trying to prove that I belonged in rooms like this, trying to ensure that no one would ever again mistake me for someone who didn't deserve to be here." Marcus leaned forward, slightly, his voice gentle but firm. "And in doing so, you began making the same mistakes that were once made against you. The very things you fought against, you began to perpetuate." The truth of these words seemed to physically impact Hassan. He reached for his wineglass with a slightly trembling hand, taking a long sip as if to steady himself. The rich burgundy caught the cellar's careful lighting, creating shadows that danced across the table between them. "Tonight," Marcus continued, "you walked into my restaurant believing you would find another opportunity to assert your position in the world. Instead, you found a mirror, one that showed you not just who you've become, but who you once were." The journey from the wine cellar back to the main dining room felt like walking through a transformation. Hassan moved differently now, his earlier swagger replaced by something more contemplative. Marcus walked beside him, no longer playing the role of servant, but standing as an equal, their shared understanding creating a bridge between their worlds. As they emerged, the restaurant's atmosphere shifted subtly. The other diners, who had been watching the evening unfold like a carefully orchestrated play, sensed that they were witnessing the final act of something remarkable. Sarah stood as Hassan approached their table, seeing her employer with new eyes. "Mr. Hassan," she said softly, "are you all right?" Hassan looked around the elegant dining room, taking in details he had overlooked earlier, the careful placement of each table, the subtle ways the staff supported one another, the genuine warmth in their interactions with guests. "I'm seeing things clearly for the first time tonight," he replied. Marcus turned to address his staff, his presence now commanding in a way that seemed perfectly natural. "James," he called to the maitre d', "would you ask Chef Maria and Sophie to join us for a moment?" The kitchen staff emerged, led by Maria and Sophie, their professional demeanor mixed with obvious pride in their restaurant and its owner. They stood together, a testament to Marcus's vision of dignity and service. "Your team," Hassan observed, "they're not just employees, are they? They're part of something larger. They're family," Marcus confirmed. "Each one of them contributes to making the Golden Palace more than just a restaurant. They understand that true luxury isn't about price tags or exclusivity. It's about creating moments of genuine connection." Professor Chen had abandoned any pretense of academic detachment, openly watching the scene unfold. He recognized that he was witnessing something rare, a moment of genuine personal transformation happening in real time. Claire Thompson rose from her corner table and approached the group. "I remember when this was just an empty building," she said, addressing Hassan directly. "Marcus saw something no one else did. Not just a restaurant, but a place where dignity would be served alongside every meal." Hassan turned to Sarah, his expression softened by understanding. "You knew about this, didn't you? About who he was?" Sarah nodded gently. "I learned earlier this evening, but what mattered wasn't his title, Mr. Hassan. It was watching how he handled your challenges. He showed the same dignity you once admired in those who helped you during your university days." The young couple, Michael and Emma Chen, had remained at their table, but their anniversary celebration had become intertwined with the evening's larger narrative. Michael found himself sharing stories with nearby diners about his father's restaurant, about the importance of remembering one's roots. Marcus gestured to the room around them. "Every person who walks through those doors carries their own story of struggle and triumph. The true measure of success isn't in how far we've climbed, but in how we treat others on our journey upward." Hassan's gaze fell on a young waitress, the same one he had berated earlier in the evening. She stood tall now, part of the team, her dignity intact despite his earlier behavior. The weight of his actions pressed against his conscience. The Golden Palace's elegant lighting seemed to soften as Hassan took a deep breath, gathering his courage for what he knew he needed to do. The young waitress he had berated earlier, Amanda, was attending to a nearby table with professional grace, despite his earlier treatment of her. "Could you—" Hassan's voice caught slightly. "Could you ask her to come here for a moment?" Marcus nodded approvingly, and James quietly approached Amanda. The young waitress walked toward their group with her head held high, though a flicker of apprehension crossed her face. The room fell silent, all eyes drawn to this moment of potential reconciliation. "I believe," Hassan began, his voice carrying none of its earlier arrogance, "that I owe you an apology. My behavior earlier was—" He paused, searching for the right words. "It was unworthy of both of us." Amanda stood straighter, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "Thank you, sir," she replied simply, her dignity intact. Sarah watched the interaction with growing respect for both her employer and the young waitress. She remembered Hassan's stories of his early days in America, of the small kindnesses that had helped him survive and thrive. Now, she was witnessing him reconnect with that part of himself. Chef Maria stepped forward, her presence adding warmth to the moment. "In this kitchen," she said, "we believe that every dish we serve carries a message of respect, both for the food and for the person receiving it. It's what Marcus taught us from day one. The restaurant had become more than just a dining room. It was now a space of transformation. Other patrons had abandoned any pretense of not watching, drawn into the powerful narrative unfolding before them. Professor Chen had tears in his eyes, recognizing the profound human drama he was witnessing. Hassan turned to Marcus, his expression open and vulnerable. "When I was a student," he said, loud enough for others to hear, "there was a cafe owner who would let me study there for hours, ordering nothing but coffee. He said that sometimes people need a place to belong more than they need a paying customer." "And now?" Marcus prompted gently. "And now I've become exactly what I once resented, someone who measures worth by status and wealth." Hassan's admission hung in the air, its honesty touching everyone who heard it. Claire Thompson approached, carrying an old photograph she'd retrieved from her purse. "I took this the day Marcus signed the lease," she said, showing it to Hassan. "Look at his eyes, the same determination I once saw in your interview when you spoke about changing the narrative for people like yourself." The photograph showed a younger Marcus, standing in the dusty, unrenovated space that would become the Golden Palace. His expression held the same quiet dignity that had marked his interactions throughout the evening. The young couple, Michael and Emma Chen, had been drawn into the group. Michael spoke up, his voice carrying the weight of personal experience. "My father always said that success should make us more understanding, not less. That each step up should give us a better view of those still climbing." Hassan looked around at the assembled group, the staff he had dismissed, the other diners he had ignored, the owner he had tried to diminish. Each face reflected back a different aspect of his own journey, his own struggles, his own triumph over adversity. The evening at the Golden Palace had transformed into something extraordinary, a moment when the barriers between service and status, between past and present, seemed to dissolve. Hassan stood in the center of the dining room, a changed man, as the weight of his realizations continued to settle around him. "Marcus," he said, addressing the owner with newfound respect, "your restaurant isn't just about fine dining, is it? It's about preserving something more precious than any luxury, human dignity." Marcus smiled warmly, gesturing to his assembled staff. "Every person here has their own dream, their own journey. Some are putting themselves through school, others are supporting families, and a few are working on starting their own restaurants someday. We're not just serving meals, we're serving hope." Sarah watched her employer with growing appreciation. The man she had known for 3 years was still there, but somehow fuller, more complete, as if pieces of himself that had been locked away were finally emerging. She thought about all the board meetings and business dealings she had witnessed, realizing that this moment in a restaurant might be his most important transaction yet. Chef Maria stepped forward, her normally reserved demeanor giving way to passionate conviction. "When I first came here," she shared, "I was a line cook with big dreams but little confidence. Marcus didn't just give me a job, he gave me a chance to prove myself, to grow, to become who I am today." The young waitress, Amanda, had remained with the group, her presence a testament to the power of forgiveness and growth. "Working here," she added softly, "taught me that service isn't about being subservient, it's about being part of something larger than ourselves." Professor Chen had abandoned his notebook entirely, recognizing that some moments needed to be experienced rather than analyzed. He watched as Hassan moved through the restaurant with new eyes, seeing not servants but fellow human beings, each with their own story of struggle and triumph. Claire Thompson approached Hassan with another photograph, this one showing Marcus serving tables in his first month of ownership. He could have hired managers, stayed in the office, she explained. Instead, he chose to work alongside his staff, to understand their challenges, to share in their journey. The impact of the evening had spread beyond Hassan's table. Other diners began sharing their own stories of humble beginnings, of helping hands, of moments when dignity had meant more than status. The restaurant had become a space of shared vulnerability and connection. Michael and Emma Chen, the young couple celebrating their anniversary, found themselves part of this larger narrative. Michael shared stories of his father's restaurant, of the community it had built, of the lives it had touched. Sometimes, he reflected, a restaurant is more than just a place to eat. It's a place where lives intersect and transform. Hassan turned to Sarah, his expression thoughtful. All those meetings, those business deals, we've been measuring success by the wrong metrics, haven't we? True wealth isn't just about what we accumulate, it's about what we give back. The staff of the Golden Palace stood together, their usual hierarchy dissolved in this moment of shared understanding. Sophie, the French pastry chef, spoke up with quiet pride. In my years at Michelin-starred restaurants, I never found what I found here, a place where excellence and humanity go hand in hand. The Golden Palace glowed with a different kind of warmth as the evening drew to a close. The elegant dining room had witnessed not just a transformation, but the birth of something new, a bridge between worlds that had seemed impossibly far apart just hours before. Hassan stood near the entrance, watching the staff complete their closing duties with newfound appreciation. The precision of their movements, the dignity in their service, all held deeper meaning now. He turned to Marcus, who stood beside him, with the quiet confidence that had been there all along, hidden beneath his waiter's uniform. "I need to do something," Hassan announced, his voice carrying the weight of decision. "Not just apologize, but make a real difference." He turned to Sarah, his trusted consultant. "Remember that educational foundation we've been discussing? I think I know exactly what its first project should be." Marcus raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Hassan continued, his excitement growing as he spoke. "A scholarship program, not just for university, but for culinary arts, hospitality management, small business ownership. Something to help people with dreams but limited resources like we once were." The staff, who had been quietly working nearby, paused in their tasks. Amanda, the young waitress, listened with particular interest, her own dreams of restaurant management suddenly seeming more attainable. "The Golden Palace could be more than just a partner," Hassan elaborated. "It could be a training ground, a place where scholarship recipients could learn not just the technical skills, but the true meaning of service and dignity." Marcus smiled, recognizing the sincerity in Hassan's words. "Sometimes," he said, "the greatest service we can offer is the opportunity for others to grow." Professor Chen, who had remained to witness this final act, finally closed his notebook. "What I've seen tonight," he declared, "isn't just a story about a restaurant or its owner. It's about the power of remembering where we came from and using our success to light the way for others." Sarah watched her employer with pride, seeing the man she had always known he could be. The business titan was still there, but tempered now with compassion and understanding. She thought of all the meetings they would need to arrange, the programs they would develop, the lives they could change. Claire Thompson approached Marcus with tears in her eyes. "You've built more than a restaurant," she said softly. "You've built a legacy of dignity." The young couple, Michael and Emma Chen, prepared to leave, their anniversary celebration having become part of a larger story of transformation. "We'll be back," Michael promised, "not just for the food, but for the reminder of what really matters." Chef Maria gathered her kitchen staff one last time that evening. "Tonight," she announced, "we served more than meals. We served hope, dignity, and the possibility of change." As the last guests departed, Hassan lingered, looking around the restaurant with new eyes. "Marcus," he said, "would you consider a partnership? Not to change what you've built, but to help it grow, to reach more people who need to learn the lessons I learned tonight." Marcus considered the offer, seeing the potential for expanding his vision of dignity and service. "Partnership," he replied thoughtfully, "built on mutual respect and shared values. That's something worth discussing." The night that had begun with arrogance and disdain had transformed into a beginning of understanding, of purpose, of possibility. The Golden Palace stood quiet now, its elegant rooms holding the echoes of revelation and change, ready to continue its mission of serving not just fine cuisine, but the essential ingredients of human dignity, respect, opportunity, and hope. Dear listeners, we hope that Marcus and Hassan's journey of transformation has touched your hearts. To continue experiencing stories that celebrate the power of dignity and human connection, we've prepared a special playlist of equally moving narratives. Find it by clicking the link to your left. If this story resonated with you, Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day we bring you unique stories that explore the complexity and beauty of human relationships. Join our community in the comments section below. We'd love to hear your own stories of transformation and dignity. Remember, sometimes the greatest changes begin with a simple moment of understanding. See you in our next story.